On another occasion, he received this email from Moscow, advising him that he had been sentenced to extrajudicial elimination. The threat came from a retired senior FSB agent named Viktor Shibalin. It was passed along to Litvinenko by a Russian dissident lawyer, Mikhail Trapashkin.
Yes, I wrote the letter.
Trapashkin says the Russian secret police were very open about their plan to kill Litvinenko.
In this particular case, it was very demonstrative, just to show that this is exactly what will happen to those who write those negative stories about, first of all, the FSB and about the country's leadership.
Alexander Litvinenko told me, he said, Boris, it's possible to fight person against a person, impossible to fight person against a system. Yeah? And if they decide to kill us, they will kill us. I share this vision, yes. If, let's say, Kremlin, Putin, intelligence service in Russia decide to kill me, I don't have any chance to survive.
The suspected lead murderer, Andrei Lugovoy, was also a former Russian FSB agent with whom Litvinenko worked back in Russia. Lugovoy showed up in London in 2005 and eventually proposed a kind of partnership with Litvinenko.
They would kind of go into business together, they would become business partners, that Lugovoy would supply information from his Moscow contacts, and Litvinenko would sell it, and they would share the profits.
At a lavish 60th birthday party for Boris Berezovsky in London in January 2006, Andrei Lugovoy was photographed in a group with Marina Litvinenko.
Sasha told me Lugovoy is very keen to extend his business to England. He wants to make something kind of private investigation business, and for Sasha it was a period of time to do something for himself, became more independent financially and being something more serious. It was a discussion for two of them to do this.
In the last year of his life, Litvinenko became involved in an investigation of criminal activity directly related to Vladimir Putin. Several Russian gangsters were arrested in Spain, and Litvinenko was going to testify in their trials about the gangsters' long-standing connections to Putin.
He alone helped the law enforcement to establish beyond doubt the personal connections between real gangsters with people immediately close to Putin and Putin himself back in the 1990s. And that was politically embarrassing. If there were a trial, for example, of Russian mafia in Spain and an FSB officer would testify, he would be a star witness. And that is the kind of threat he posed, as far as I think. That's the most plausible motive.
Litvinenko told Lugovoy about his role in the upcoming Spanish trials, information Lugovoy likely shared in Moscow. It was at that time that Lugovoy and Kovtun were apparently recruited to kill Litvinenko, and the murder weapon was selected.
The moment that polonium entered Litvinenko, his fate was sealed.
When the killers of Alexander Litvinenko arrived in London, they didn't realize that they left a trail of radioactive contamination in every location they visited, on everything they touched. Evidence presented at the inquiry showed exactly where the contamination was detected, on chairs, tables, and the teapot. The areas in purple show the highest readings, called full-scale deflection.
Let's go back 3 or 4 years.
Nuclear physicist Nick Priest is one of the world's leading experts on polonium-210, the radioactive poison chosen as the murder weapon in the Litvinenko case.
We have tea, which was contaminated. So a small amount of the polonium could have been added to the teapot, to the tea. The moment we've done this, then the teapot is contaminated. I drink it. My mouth is now contaminated. I might wipe my mouth. My hand is now contaminated. I put my hand down on the table is now contaminated. I might put my arm on the seat, that's contaminated. And I push the door open with my hand, that's now contaminated. So you end up with a whole chain of contamination.
The Russian government has gone to extreme lengths to try and explain away the trail of radioactive contamination that leads to Moscow. The Kremlin has repeatedly suggested that Alexander Litvinenko must have been smuggling polonium and accidentally poisoned himself with it. Alexander Nekrasov is a former Kremlin advisor.
He might have poisoned himself because he didn't really know how to handle this, these materials, could have opened the container or something. Or he could have been taken out by some people actually in Britain, even the mob, even the security services, because, he was talking too much and so on. But no, the trace doesn't go to Moscow.
In fact, experts at the inquiry traced the polonium to a nuclear reactor just east of Moscow, in the Russian town of Sarov. Putin has made public visits to the facility in Sarov, where polonium is used as a trigger for nuclear weapons. Polonium from here has also been sold to Western countries. It turns out that every batch of radioactive polonium has its own unique chemical composition, which reveals where it was made.
Every radioactive material which is produced in a reactor has its own fingerprint. And of course, there was a lot of polonium from Russia which was being used in Europe and in the West, and you could compare the material with that material.
The inquiry established that the polonium was first brought to London on a Trans-Aero flight from Moscow on October 16th by Andrei Lugovoy and Dmitry Kovtun. They had scheduled a meeting with Alexander Litvinenko at a security company at 25 Grosvenor Street in London. The public inquiry revealed that this was likely the first attempt to kill Litvinenko, but it failed. The poison apparently spilled. The police later found massive radioactive contamination of the tablecloth, and some also on the boardroom chairs.
Now, we don't know precisely what happened, but I think our best guess is that the polonium was put in a jug or a cup, and that I think Litvinenko failed to drink. I think if he'd drunk from the water at that point, he would have been killed, but he didn't.
The killers returned to the Shaftesbury Hotel, where one of them apparently decided to dispose of the rest of the polonium. It was spilled down the sink. The polonium left a radioactive trail on the sink drain, and especially in the U-shaped drain pipe, where it likely sat for some time.
Polonium will tend to stick to surfaces, so if you put it down into the water system, into the drains, it would stick there. It would stick onto the surfaces, ceramic surfaces. It sticks particularly hard to anything which is metal. Basically, it just fuses and becomes part of the metal surface.
Marina Litvinenko later remembered that her husband was somewhat ill on the day of that first attempt on his life.
He felt a little bit down and he didn't feel well, and then he suddenly vomited. And he tried not to eat next day and just day after next, just tried to keep and understand how does he feel. It was very unusual, and why it made me to remember this. And when we talk after to police, I remind this day when Sasha became sick.
Lugovoy and Kovtun returned to Moscow, but Lugovoy came back to London alone just 1 week later, on October 25th, for what appears to be the second murder attempt. Police later found radioactive contamination on his airline seat. This time he stayed at the upscale Sheraton Park Lane Hotel, where again he had some meetings with Litvinenko. For some reason he must have changed his mind and returned to his room, where police later discovered contamination on the bedside table and especially in the bathroom. Apparently the polonium was thrown into the wastebasket, which recorded very high levels of radioactivity, as did the floors and wall beside it.
There's one moment where two scientists turn up at room 848 of the Sheraton Park Hotel where Lugovoy stayed in October 2006. They put their Geiger counters out, and the readings are so alarming, they retreat. They literally have to leave the room because the room is so toxic. This is how dangerous this polonium was.
Lugovoy flew back to Moscow, again leaving radioactive contamination on his airline seat, and returned 2 days later, this time meeting up with his alleged co-conspirator, Dmitry Kovtun. Apparently, Litvinenko took an instant dislike to Kovtun.
He said he was a very unpleasant, very antisocial, and looked very rude. And I remember one sentence about Kovtun, what Kovtun said: "I don't care about anything in this life, only money, what I care about." For Sasha, it was quite not good characteristic of person.
An amazing story of Dmitry Kovtun's activities leading up to the murder was revealed at the British inquiry.
It seems that Dmitry Kovtun, who flew to Germany, where he used to live, before flying to London to kill Litvinenko, met a friend from the Italian restaurant in Hamburg where he worked before. This is on the eve of the poisoning attempt, and tells his friend, "I have a very expensive poison, and I've got to poison someone who's a traitor. I've got to put it in their food or drink. Do you know any cooks in London who could help me?" which is amazing. And what was extraordinary was the friend, the German waiter, said, yeah, actually, I do know a cook. Passed him the number, and on the morning of the poisoning, Kofton phones the cook, who is busy, unavailable. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, these are witness statements which are going to be given in court, and for me, I think this is convincing proof that Lugovoy and Kofton are guilty.
Lugovoy and Kofton poisoned him. And you will decide.
When the CCTV footage of Alexander Litvinenko approaching the Millennium Hotel was played at the public inquiry, along with the images of Lugovoy and Kofton preparing to kill him, Marina Litvinenko felt an overwhelming urge to try to reach out and stop time.
I'm a very realistic person. I'm very logical, but I just felt if something you can change, to put such a different direction, to make something not happen, and this meeting will be never ever. But of course I know it might be in a movie, but not in real life.
The thing about polonium is that if you keep it securely, it's obviously not very good for you, but it won't kill you. If you ingest it, in other words, swallow it or inject it, then you're a dead man walking.
When we come back, how the Litvinenko polonium mystery was solved. After the fateful Millennium Hotel meeting, Alexander Litvinenko returned to his home in North London for dinner with his family. It was a celebration of the 6th anniversary of their arrival in Britain. At midnight, he began to vomit uncontrollably.
Sasha said from very beginning it might be not food poisoning. It looks so damaging, it looks so unusual. He said symptoms too similar to what they did study in the college when it's some chemical poisoning, something like this. But I try to every time to say no, how it might be chemical poisoning or something different, like who could do this to you?
After 2 days, Litvinenko was taken to his local hospital and then transferred to London's University Hospital. Doctors worked feverishly trying to figure out the cause of his illness. As word of the poisoning spread, reporters gathered outside the hospital.
Very tired.
Alex Goldfarb briefed them on Litvinenko's condition.
Older than he really is.
As he watched his friend deteriorating quickly.
I've seen a couple of people dying of cancer. So that was very much like a deterioration of a terminal cancer patient. But what usually happens over a period of several months, it happened within a week.
On day 12, Litvinenko's hair began to fall out.
Tried to calm him down, and I was in rubber gloves. And when I just tried to calm him, and then I realized, oh, his hair in my gloves. And then I said first time, doctor, what's this? Why it's happened? And he said again, it might be side effect of this medical treatment. But I couldn't wait, and I couldn't be patient anymore. I just said, we need to talk to more doctors. And it was first time when a doctor from cancer unit said he looks exactly like his patient after chemical or radioactive treatment.
The impact which Alexander Litvinenko had from the polonium is probably about the same as having 500 CAT scans, one after the other at the same time.
At first, the doctors suspected radioactive thallium poisoning, but then ruled that out because there was no gamma radiation that normally accompanies thallium. By now, the police and nuclear scientists were also involved, searching for clues at all the locations Litvinenko visited.
The British authorities, as Litvinenko lay dying in a London hospital room, they didn't know what was poisoning him. They had these radiation symptoms, but no gamma radiation, which is what you would normally expect. And it was only literally in the last hours before he died that they discovered this was radioactive polonium. And the reason they didn't find out before, polonium had never been used as a murder weapon before, certainly not in the UK, not in the Western world.
Nuclear experts think the murderers believed that their poison, with its alpha radiation, would never be detected.
It's entirely reasonable to think it might not have been detected. After all, it was only detected on the day before he died, and it's quite conceivable, it would seem to me, that he would have died and people would have thought it's some sort of infection or some sort of other poison, and he would have been buried without the polonium being detected.
This is the last image of Alexander Litvinenko before he died. He was incredibly weak, his face pockmarked from the poison in his system.
When I left him last day, before he was able to talk, he was a very, very quiet all day. He didn't talk. And when I say, I'm ready to go home, and he smiled, but his smile was so sad. And I said, Sasha, please, don't worry. I'm going back soon. And he just told me, Marina, I love you so much. And he says, it's so quiet. And I say just, oh, it's so good to hear it from you. I don't remember when you did say this last time. And actually, it was last words what I heard from him.
Alexander Litvinenko was buried 14 days after he died in London's Highgate Cemetery. The coffin was lined with lead to prevent radioactive contamination of the pallbearers. By this time, London police had already traced the polonium trail back to Moscow and to Andrei Lugovoy. Former KGB man Lugovoy has staunchly maintained his innocence ever since. Luke Harding has met him numerous times.
It's as if someone had taken his conscience and sheared it off with a pair of scissors. There's an emptiness there, there's a coldness there, there's a calculating side to him. Now, he's not stupid. He's a reasonably intelligent person who I think has been very well coached and whose subsequent career since this case has prospered.
Vladimir Putin has protected Lugovoy and denounced the British investigations and the public inquiry as deeply biased against Russia.
The inquiry was basically started under pressure. There are certain people in Britain who want this inquiry to take place because it gives them opportunity to attack Russia, especially nowadays when the Ukraine crisis is a major irritant in the relations between Russia and the West. This is a charade. This is something that shouldn't be happening in a court of law in Britain, of all places.
This inquiry is tremendously important. Either we believe things, we believe in human rights, we believe in a legal process, we believe that there should be punishment for a crime, or we live in this kind of nihilistic Putin world where we don't believe in anything, where it's just great powers battling against each other, zones of influence that were plunged back into the world of the 19th century.
Meanwhile, Putin's critics have continued to die. The latest, Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, murdered in front of the Kremlin as the Litvinenko inquiry was in session in London.
After what happened with Sasha in 2006, and now we in 2015, and it's not only my story, it's a story of Russia and how Russia has changed for all this period of time and how many other people have been killed. And I believe all responsibilities is on the Russian government and the man who is responsible for all of what happened to Russia now, it's Mr. Putin himself.
Александр Литвиненко не является носителем вообще никаких секретов. Все, что он мог сказать негативного в отношении своей службы, где он раньше работал, он же давно сказал.
The key question raised by the British inquiry concerns the role of Vladimir Putin and whether he personally ordered this murder. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly said that Alexander Litvinenko was not worth killing because he had no access to Russian secrets. And Putin's defenders say he would never become personally involved in a foreign assassination.
Well, first of all, the head of state, and it's not only Russia, never gets involved in anything like that, ever. Because it goes against the whole nature of the head of state office. And that is why I always find it ridiculous when I hear accusations of Putin as president ordering a hit. You know, it just doesn't work like that.
Well, it certainly used to work like that. There's plenty of evidence from retired former KGB spy masters who said that these things were authorized at the very top of the Soviet state by the Politburo. If you remember that the invasion of Crimea by Russian troops a year ago said originally there were no Russian troops there, subsequently admitted that he was lying, although he didn't use those words, and then said that he had personally micromanaged it. He personally micromanaged this. So really we know that Putin makes very important decisions, and this was certainly one of them.
Alexander Litvinenko's son Anatoly was only 12 when his father died.
7 or 8, not many.
He's now a student in East European Studies at London University. He rejects the idea that his father's murder could have been carried out by junior Russian officials without Putin's approval, especially considering the expense of the operation.
For one thing, no junior person would have the means to take such a responsibility or take such an action, because it's very unlikely they would have the access to a multi-million pound radioactive isotope such as polonium. So not only do they not have a means to do that, I don't think anyone would risk being responsible for the death of one of Russia's greatest, I guess, critics at the time without Putin's knowledge and without his kind of blessing, so to speak.
Marina and Anatoly Litvinenko believe that all the evidence at the public inquiry is pointing towards Vladimir Putin as the author of the crime.
And all experts agree that it could not have happened without direct authorization of Mr. Putin, because not only because it's in UK, and not only because it involves a radioactive weapon, but also because everybody in the system knows about long personal history that existed between Litvinenko, Putin, and Berezovsky, and the emotional attitude that Mr. Putin has to this crowd of people hiding from him in London. So nobody in his right mind would authorize such an operation without asking first, because nobody would have known what the attitude of the boss would be. So this, to me, is the strongest argument that it couldn't have happened without Putin's knowledge.
When he first moved to the United Kingdom and was raising the alarm about Vladimir Putin, Alexander Litvinenko was astounded at the warm reception accorded the Russian president by many Western countries.
Little gift.
Even after it was clear that the Russian government was likely responsible for Litvinenko's murder, then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton announced America's desire to hit the reset button and restore cordial relations with Moscow. Many Russians saw a kind of willful blindness in the West about Putin.
Very welcome.
Here was a man who had jailed his opponents, murdered his opponents, destroyed the electoral system, destroyed the federal system, absolutely reversed judicial reform. And only about 8 years into his reign were Western media even starting to talk about his authoritarian tendencies. I mean, he had built a fully fledged authoritarian regime at that point. He had destroyed what little democracy there had been in Russia, and Western editors and Western politicians were willfully ignorant and dismissive of what he had been doing. The reset button was very much part of the same story.
In this case, there is a specific guy by the name of Vladimir Putin who ordered to kill my friend and the husband of my other friend, Marina, and he has to be held responsible regardless of whether he is a dictator or a Democrat or a big friend of the United States or the foe. He's a murderer, and that's important. What's important.
Judge Robert Owen is presiding over the Litvinenko inquiry. He has already said that there is a prima facie case against the Russian government as being responsible for the murder. It is unlikely that he could go beyond that to lay the blame on Vladimir Putin himself. 5 years ago, however, leaked diplomatic cables showed that a senior American official privately told European allies that the Litvinenko plot could not have been carried out without Putin's knowledge and approval. All this creates a serious challenge for the UK government and the West: how to deal with a world leader who almost everyone believes is personally guilty of murder.